What happens when a duchess, who has built her brand on grace, glamour, and carefully choreographed appearances, suddenly finds herself at the center of a joke that strips all of that away in front of millions? That is the question that opened the 2025 Emmy Awards, a night meant to celebrate television's best, but which instead delivered a cultural earthquake. In just a few words, a comedian, Nate Bargatze, managed to collapse years of royal myth-making with a single punchline. And Meghan Markle, who came to the Emmys hoping for applause and validation, left with humiliation that echoed around the world. But the truth of what happened that night isn't just about one joke. It's about the fragile power of image, the ruthless honesty of comedy, and the way Hollywood reacts when the spotlight turns cruel. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Picture it. The Emmys are unfolding in all their glittering chaos. The red carpet is a parade of sequins, designer gowns, photographers screaming names, and publicists whispering instructions. For Meghan Markle, this was more than an award show. It was her chance to prove she still mattered in Hollywood after so many doors seemed to close. Netflix deals questioned, projects canceled, whispers that her influence had waned. She needed this night, needed to remind the industry she wasn't just another celebrity. She was Meghan, the woman who had shaken the monarchy and demanded her place on the world stage. But in that moment, she forgot something crucial. Comedy has no crown, and Nate Bargatze wasn't there to bow. You could almost feel the tension before the joke even landed. Meghan and Harry walked into the auditorium with that mix of polished smiles and guarded stiffness they've perfected. Some clapped politely, some rolled their eyes. Others whispered, curious to see how the night would treat them. Meghan sat tall, her gown shimmering under the lights, rehearsed smiles flashing at the cameras. She expected admiration. What she got was something else entirely. And here's the part that stings. It wasn't just the audience in that room. It was the millions watching at home, waiting for a moment to gossip about, a moment that would define the evening. Nate gave it to them, wrapped in laughter. Now, ask yourself this. Why do we hang on to moments like this? Why do we, as viewers, replay clips of celebrities squirming under a joke? Why do we share memes and hashtags mocking someone else's discomfort? Because these moments feel like unmaskings. They strip away the polished PR, the glossy magazine covers, the carefully staged Netflix documentaries. For 1 second, we glimpse what might be real. Meghan, the duchess who branded herself as untouchable, suddenly looked touchable, vulnerable, even human. That's why this story matters now. Because in a world obsessed with celebrity perfection, a single punchline reminded us that even duchesses bleed when cut by comedy. Let's rewind for a moment. Nate Bargatze isn't the kind of comic you expect to stir up global headlines. He's not abrasive. He doesn't thrive on cruelty. He doesn't throw punches without a smile. His style is slow burn, disarming, the kind that sneaks up on you. That's what makes what happened so shocking. Because when he looked toward Meghan and dropped the phrase entitled princess, it didn't sound like an attack. It sounded like an observation. Casual, almost careless. And that's why it landed so brutally. Because the best comedy cuts deepest when it sounds like truth. The audience reaction told the story before Meghan's face did. Gasps mixed with laughter. Some hands covered mouths in disbelief, while others clapped harder, desperate to signal they weren't afraid to laugh at the Duchess. Cameras caught the flicker of Meghan's smile. The kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Harry shifted in his seat, uncomfortable but unsure what to do. For the first time that night, Meghan wasn't in control. And the irony? Meghan has built her narrative on exposing uncomfortable truths about the monarchy. But when a comedian turned that same spotlight on her, she froze. The hunter became the hunted. Think about that for a moment. Meghan has faced tabloid scandals, lawsuits, brutal headlines from the British press. But this was different. This wasn't an article she could dismiss as racist reporting or biased press. This was live. This was laughter in real time, bouncing off the walls of one of Hollywood's most powerful stages. She couldn't edit it. She couldn't spin it before it spread. By the time her smile cracked and her eyes narrowed, the clip was already being recorded, clipped, and shared across every platform. And that's the danger of comedy. It doesn't just entertain, it immortalizes humiliation. Now, let me ask you this. What happens when the entire room laughs at you instead of with you? How do you recover when a joke becomes a mirror you can't escape? That's the moment Meghan found herself in. And here's the twist. This wasn't just a comedian riffing off the cuff. This was the culmination of years of whispers, headlines, and public sentiment boiling over. Nate Bargatze simply said aloud what many had been thinking quietly, that Meghan, in her pursuit of relevance, had begun to look less like a trailblazing reformer and more like, well, an entitled princess. But why did it sting so much? Because the phrase tapped into the very image Meghan has been running from. She wants to be seen as strong, independent, compassionate, modern. But in the eyes of critics, she often comes across as demanding, controlling, and out of touch. Nate's words crystallized that perception in a way that no article or op-ed ever could. In 4 syllables, he captured years of criticism, and the audience, perhaps reluctantly, agreed with laughter. And yet, here's where the story twists again. Meghan wasn't about to take it lying down. Backstage, her team scrambled. Phones buzzed. Messages flew. Allies were contacted. Plans were hatched. They needed to control the narrative before it spun out of hand. But how do you fight something that spreads faster than wildfire? How do you fight laughter itself? That's the question her team wrestled with, and the answer wasn't pretty. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because before the spin, before the headlines, before the leaked clips and viral memes, there was just that moment. That instant when Meghan sat frozen, Harry glanced nervously, and Nate smirked as the crowd roared. It was the moment the Emmys stopped being about awards and became about a duchess undone by a joke. And that's where this story begins, not in the laughter, but in the silence that followed. Because it's in that silence where power shifts. And Meghan felt it slipping. The 2025 Emmy Awards should have been a coronation for Meghan, a Hollywood homecoming to silence her critics. Instead, it became her undoing. But what came after, what happened when the cameras dimmed and the laughter spilled into whispers, is something no one was prepared for. Because if you think that one joke ended the night, you're wrong. It started a war. A war between comedy and royalty, between perception and reality, between Meghan Markle's carefully crafted image and the brutal honesty of a laugh. And trust me, you'll want to see how that war unfolded. Every feud has a starting line, and this one began long before the Emmy red carpet. If you want to understand why Nate Bargatze's joke landed like a lightning bolt, you have to rewind. Because Meghan Markle didn't just walk into that theater as a guest. She walked in carrying years of baggage. Hollywood deals gone sour, Netflix cancellations, whispers of diva behavior, and a reputation that seemed to shift with every headline. The truth is, her presence at the 2025 Emmy Awards wasn't just about being part of television's biggest night. It was about redemption. It was about silencing critics. It was about proving she could still command a stage that had been slowly slipping away from her grasp. But little did she know, that same stage would become the scene of her humiliation. Think about it. Meghan's Hollywood return had been shaky. After the infamous Netflix deal, which critics blasted as underwhelming, and whispers that streaming platforms weren't lining up for more Sussex-style content, the Emmys looked like a lifeline. She needed to be seen in the right places, photographed next to the right people, smiling at the right jokes. She needed visibility, credibility, legitimacy. But here's where the irony kicks in. Because when you chase validation, you also make yourself vulnerable to rejection. And on Emmy night, that rejection didn't come from producers or executives behind closed doors. It came from a comedian with a microphone and perfect comedic timing. Before the spotlight found Meghan, Hollywood had already been buzzing. For months leading up to the Emmys, the gossip mills churned. Was Meghan plotting a new project to rebuild her image? Was she going to announce something groundbreaking? Some insiders even speculated she was trying to reinvent herself as a queen of Hollywood philanthropy, mixing glamour with global causes. The timing of her appearance wasn't accidental. She knew the Emmys were a platform where narratives could be rewritten in a single night. But what she didn't account for was this. Comedy has its own agenda, and it answers to no crown. Let's zoom in on the energy in the auditorium that night. A-list celebrities chatting, glasses clinking, nervous nominees clutching hands under the tables. Cameras sweeping across familiar faces, searching for reactions to broadcast live to millions. And then there was Meghan, seated prominently with Harry. They looked regal, polished, as though they had been choreographed for maximum effect. But beneath that surface, insiders noticed something. Meghan seemed tense, her posture rigid, her smile practiced. She wasn't there to enjoy the show, she was there to be seen. That's a dangerous position to be in when you're walking into a room full of comedians. And here's where Nate Bargatze comes in. He's not the type to pick fights for the sake of controversy, but he does have a sharp eye for hypocrisy, for entitlement, for the absurdity of the powerful. He's a storyteller, a slow-burn comic whose southern drawl lulls you in before the punchline drops. That style made him the perfect foil for Meghan, even if she didn't know it yet. Because when you're trying to project untouchable elegance, nothing cuts deeper than being brought back down to earth by humor. Meghan may have braced herself for critics in the press. She didn't brace herself for Nate. Now, here's the real question. Why Meghan? Why did she become such an irresistible target for a joke at the Emmys? The answer lies in her trajectory. She left the royal family to gain independence, but in Hollywood, she seemed to trade one palace for another. The same accusations of entitlement that haunted her in the UK began resurfacing in California. Demands, conditions, the need to control narratives. Meghan wanted to prove she was more than a title, but in chasing that, she reinforced the image of someone desperate to cling to status. Nate saw that contradiction. And for a comedian, contradiction is gold. The build-up to the Emmy night humiliation wasn't a single misstep. It was years of small cracks in Meghan's public persona, years of carefully curated interviews that didn't land the way they were supposed to. Remember the Oprah sit-down? At first, it felt explosive. But over time, critics began questioning its claims, pointing out inconsistencies. The more Meghan tried to tell her side of the story, the less control she seemed to have over the narrative. By 2025, many in Hollywood weren't sure whether to treat her as royalty, celebrity, or liability. That uncertainty created the perfect storm for Nate's joke to stick. Let's be clear, the Emmy Awards stage is ruthless. It's not just about who wins or loses trophies. It's about who wins or loses the audience. And that night, Meghan's plan was simple. Show up, be seen, smile through the cameras, remind Hollywood she belonged. But as history has shown, the more carefully someone choreographs their appearance, the more vulnerable they become to chaos. Meghan had rehearsed everything, except for the possibility of becoming the punchline. And let's not underestimate how much tension was already in the air. Some celebrities whispered about whether Meghan and Harry were overshadowing the real nominees. Others wondered if their presence was even necessary. Was Meghan there as a contributor to the world of television, or simply to remind people of her name? That suspicion was simmering in the room. All it took was a comedian to say what others were too polite to admit. So when Nate finally delivered the infamous line, it wasn't just a joke. It was the culmination of years of resentment, suspicion, and whispered doubts. It landed because it was the truth people had been afraid to say out loud. And in comedy, timing is everything. The timing here was brutal. Meghan, poised and regal, expecting applause, suddenly stripped of that illusion by 4 devastating syllables, entitled princess. The laughter that followed wasn't just about Nate's joke. It was about the release of tension. It was about the room finally acknowledging the contradiction they had all felt but hadn't voiced. Ask yourself this. Was Meghan doomed the moment she decided to show up at the Emmys? Or was she doomed the moment she decided to play Hollywood's game of image over substance? Because the truth is, this wasn't just about one joke. This was about the slow unraveling of a carefully woven narrative, a thread pulled loose until the whole fabric began to fray. Meghan may have believed she was in control of her story, but in that auditorium, the story slipped from her hands into the grip of laughter. And here's the irony. Meghan wanted to reclaim relevance at the Emmys. Instead, she became more relevant than ever for all the wrong reasons. Because Nate's joke wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Backstage, the fallout began. Phones buzzed. Plans shifted. Allies called. Meghan's team scrambled to manage the damage. But how do you fight something that moves faster than spin, faster than press releases? How do you fight a joke that lives forever in replay clips and viral hashtags? That's the nightmare Meghan stumbled into. And the truth? The nightmare was only getting started. Because Meghan thought she came to the Emmys to win back Hollywood. What she didn't realize was that Hollywood had already chosen sides. and Nate Bargatze had just given the town its excuse to laugh her out of the room. But Meghan wasn't ready to accept defeat. Not yet. And what she did next would push the night from embarrassing to explosive. If you know Nate Bargatze, you know he's not the kind of comedian who goes for easy tabloid headlines. He's not brash like Ricky Gervais, he's not cutting like Chris Rock, and he doesn't lean into shock value. His weapon is subtler and deadlier. He lures you in with that Tennessee drawl, that calm, almost innocent delivery, then drops a line so casual you don't realize the room has shifted until the laughter erupts. That's why Meghan Markle was the perfect target. Not because Nate had a vendetta, not because he wanted to cause chaos, but because her carefully cultivated image contained the very thing Nate thrives on: contradictions begging to be exposed. Let's pause for a second. Why do comedians matter at events like the Emmys? They're not just there to tell jokes. They're cultural referees. They're the ones who point at the emperor's new clothes and ask if anyone else notices he's naked. And Meghan, despite all her efforts to control how the world sees her, showed up at the Emmys cloaked in contradictions. A woman who claimed she escaped the stiff formality of royalty, now sitting stiff and formal on Hollywood's biggest stage. A woman who insisted she wanted a private life, now placing herself in the most public of spotlights. A woman who once condemned the brutality of the British press, now dependent on Hollywood's approval. To a comedian like Nate Bargatze, that's irresistible. Picture Nate as he prepared for the night. He didn't need to script a long tirade about Meghan. He didn't need to spend 10 minutes dissecting her career. That's not his style. His style is observational, deceptively simple. He finds the truth hiding in plain sight and wraps it in a line that seems almost too obvious once you've heard it. That's why Entitled Princess worked so brutally well. It wasn't an elaborate takedown. It was 4 syllables of distilled irony, delivered in a room that already sensed the truth but hadn't yet dared to laugh at it. Ask yourself, why do we laugh when comedians call out entitlement? Because deep down, we resent it. We live in a world where entitlement is flaunted daily by celebrities, politicians, influencers. We put up with it because it feels untouchable. But when someone punctures it with humor, we feel relief. That's what Nate did. He gave the audience permission to release the tension they'd been carrying about Meghan for years. And once that dam broke, there was no going back. Now let's dig deeper into why Meghan was especially vulnerable to Nate's style. Meghan's power has always been about narrative. She knows how to spin her story, how to frame her life as a battle between tradition and progress, cruelty and compassion, monarchy and modernity. But here's the trap. Comedy doesn't care about narrative. Comedy cares about perception. And the perception of Meghan, particularly in 2025, had shifted. She wasn't seen as the underdog anymore. She was seen as the woman who had every platform, every privilege, every chance, and still demanded more. Nate didn't invent that perception. He just articulated it with a smirk. And think about the setting. The Emmys are full of celebrities who've worked their way up, clawing through auditions, enduring rejection, fighting for scraps before finally making it to the big stage. For many of them, Meghan represents the opposite, someone who parachuted into Hollywood with fame and money already secured. To them, she isn't a fellow artist. She's an outsider demanding respect without earning it. Nate understood that. His joke wasn't just for the audience at home. It was for the room. A room that, deep down, was ready to laugh at Meghan rather than with her. Here's another layer. Nate's disarming persona. He doesn't look threatening. He doesn't sound like someone trying to stir trouble. That's what made the joke hit even harder. If Ricky Gervais had said it, people might have rolled their eyes and said, "There he goes again, trying to shock." But Nate saying it made it feel like an observation rather than an insult. It wasn't mean-spirited, it was almost conversational. And that's the cruelty of comedy. Sometimes the lines that hurt the most are the ones that don't sound like attacks at all. Let's not forget timing. In comedy, timing isn't just about when the punchline lands. It's about when the culture is ready to hear it. For years, Meghan had the protective shield of sympathy. The underdog duchess battling an outdated monarchy. The victim of ruthless British tabloids. But by 2025, that sympathy had thinned. Stories of diva behavior on set, canceled projects, whispers of tension with Hollywood elites. All of it had accumulated. People weren't laughing at her struggles anymore. They were questioning them. That's why the line detonated. It landed in a room that was primed to agree. Do you see the pattern here? Nate's style is precision. Meghan's persona was contradiction. The two collided on that stage, and the result was devastating. Nate didn't just joke about Meghan. He exposed the very foundation of her Hollywood strategy. He took the image she had built brick by brick and flicked it with a feather, watching it wobble. That's why the laughter stung. Because it wasn't just laughter at a joke, it was laughter at her entire brand. But let's not forget, Meghan isn't someone who accepts humiliation quietly. She's someone who calculates, who strategizes, who finds ways to flip the narrative back in her favor. And as the laughter echoed through the auditorium, you can bet she was already plotting her response. What she didn't realize was that Nate wasn't finished. Because while she scrambled to protect her image, Nate's style meant he had more than one arrow in his quiver. And the next one would cut even deeper. Because if the entitled princess line shook Meghan, what came after threatened to break her. And the room, now emboldened, was ready to laugh again. The Emmys aren't just about trophies, they're about survival. Every actor, every director, every producer who walks into that room knows the truth. One night can elevate your career or sink it. The applause isn't just recognition, it's currency. The laughter isn't just amusement. It's a signal of who belongs and who doesn't. That night in 2025, the air inside the auditorium wasn't filled only with the shimmer of gowns and the buzz of champagne. It was thick with tension. Everyone knew Meghan Markle was there. Everyone was waiting to see how the night would treat her. And in that waiting, an unease settled like fog before a storm. Take a moment and picture the room. Bright lights bouncing off golden statues. Cameramen scurrying, whispering into headsets. Lenses swiveling to capture reactions. Nominees fidgeting, rehearsing their acceptance faces, some hopeful, some already resigned. The front rows glittered with Hollywood royalty, the veterans whose presence defined legitimacy. But then, a few rows back, sat Meghan and Harry. Not nominees, not presenters, not winners, guests, outsiders sitting inside. The cameras caught them often, lingering just long enough to remind everyone they were there, but never long enough to crown them with belonging. Meghan smiled, poised, her gown flawless. Harry shifted occasionally, his hands resting stiffly in his lap. They were in the room, but they weren't of it. And here's the thing about Hollywood. It can smell desperation. It can sense when someone is trying too hard, when someone's presence is more about needing to be seen than being earned. Meghan radiated that energy. She wasn't there to support a project. She wasn't there as a nominee. She was there to reclaim space. And the irony? By simply being there, she gave comedians like Nate Bargatze the sharpest material of the night. Because in a room where everyone has fought, scraped, and bled to get there, Meghan's entitlement hung in the air like perfume, sweet to some, suffocating to others. But it wasn't just Meghan. The entire room carried tension for different reasons. The Emmys in 2025 weren't taking place in a vacuum. The industry had been rocked by strikes, scandals, cancellations. Streaming wars had shifted the power balance. Projects people poured years into had vanished overnight. Careers had been upended. There was bitterness beneath the glamour. And into that bitterness walked Meghan, embodying everything Hollywood resents. Privilege without grind, spotlight without sweat. That's why the room was ready. They didn't know what was coming, but they were primed to laugh at her expense the moment someone gave permission. Do you feel that? That crackle in the air before a thunderclap? That's what the Emmys felt like in those moments leading up to Nate's first strike. Small signs gave it away. A-listers exchanging sly glances when Meghan appeared on the jumbo screen. Quiet chuckles at her exaggerated nods and polite applause. And Meghan, aware she was being watched, doubled down on her performance. Smiles wider. Posture straighter. Laughs at jokes that weren't funny. She was playing the role of someone unfazed, but her eyes, her eyes, betrayed a flicker of nerves. She knew the room wasn't hers. She knew the night could turn, but she didn't know how quickly. And then came Nate Bargatze, walking to the microphone, relaxed, unhurried, as though the weight of the night didn't touch him. His southern cadence rolled over the crowd, disarming them, loosening their shoulders. He poked fun at Hollywood absurdities, at the industry's quirks, at the awkwardness of celebrities trying to look normal. Laughter rippled. The tension cracked, but it didn't break. Not yet. Because everyone in that room was waiting. Who would he go after next? Who would be the night's target? And then, almost casually, Nate's gaze slid across the auditorium and landed on Meghan. It was a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but cameras caught it. Meghan's smile froze for half a second, as though she knew what was coming. Harry leaned slightly toward her, his jaw tightening. And then Nate leaned into the microphone, his voice steady, unhurried, and dropped the line that detonated the room. Entitled Princess. The reaction was instant. A wave of laughter rolled across the theater. Not polite chuckles. Not nervous titters. Real, belly laughter. The kind that erupts when someone has said aloud what everyone has been thinking, but no one dared to voice. Some stars slapped their knees. Others threw their heads back. Even a few who had sworn loyalty to Meghan couldn't help themselves. The tension shattered, replaced by gleeful release. Cameras panned, catching faces caught between shock and delight. And in the middle of it all, Meghan sat still, her smile plastered on but trembling at the edges. That's the thing about these moments. They're not just jokes. They're shifts in power. In that instant, Meghan lost control of the room. She wasn't the Duchess anymore. She wasn't the Hollywood hopeful. She was the punchline. And worse, she couldn't respond. She couldn't storm out. She couldn't glare. She couldn't do anything but sit there and endure it while millions watched. Her silence screamed louder than any comeback could. Ask yourself, why did the room erupt so hard? Why did the laughter seem almost cathartic? Because Nate didn't just roast Meghan. He gave the room permission to stop pretending. For years, people had smiled politely at her attempts to reinvent herself, nodded through her speeches, applauded her projects. But deep down, many had grown weary. Weary of the drama, weary of the contradictions, weary of the constant demand for sympathy. Nate's line cut through that weariness like a blade. It was the truth, simple and brutal. And Hollywood loves nothing more than a brutal truth wrapped in laughter. Now imagine sitting in Meghan's seat. The cameras trained on her. The laughter echoing around her. The man beside her powerless to shield her. The very stage she came to claim turning against her. Can you feel the isolation? Can you feel the walls closing in? That's what she felt in that moment. And though she smiled, though she clapped politely, she knew. The night was no longer hers. The night belonged to Nate. But here's the catch. The joke wasn't just about the moment. It was about everything that came before and everything that would follow. It was about years of whispers condensed into one line. It was about an industry's collective sigh finally exhaled in laughter. And it was about setting the stage for a chain reaction that would unfold long after the Emmys ended. Because this wasn't the peak of the story. This was just the spark. The words were simple. The delivery was calm. But the impact was seismic. Nate Bargatze leaned into the microphone, looked toward Meghan Markle, and with a smirk that felt almost accidental, dropped the line, entitled Princess. For syllables. That was all it took to send shockwaves through the Emmys, through Hollywood, and across the world. In that moment, you could feel the air split. Half the audience gasped. Half the audience burst into laughter. And Meghan, frozen, trapped under the spotlight, could do nothing but sit there and smile through the humiliation. This wasn't just a joke. This was a detonation. A cultural grenade disguised as comedy. Because the phrase, entitled princess, carried far more than its literal meaning. It carried years of resentment, criticism, and suspicion about Meghan's rise and her relentless need to control narratives. It was the nickname whispered in private, the label muttered behind closed doors, the insult that had never before been spoken aloud on a stage so grand. Nate gave it shape, voice, and laughter. And in doing so, he stripped Meghan of the very thing she had come to reclaim, control. Let's pause here. Why did this line land so hard? Why did it cut deeper than any tabloid headline or royal scandal? Because it was perfectly timed. Comedy lives in timing, and Nate delivered this line at a moment when Meghan's image was already wobbling. Hollywood was tired of her dramatics, exhausted by her constant reinventions, skeptical of her every move. Entitled Princess summed up what people had been feeling but hadn't dared to articulate. It was the truth, hiding in plain sight, and the entire room knew it. That's why the laughter felt so loud. It wasn't just amusement, it was agreement. Now imagine Meghan in that exact second. Her dress glittering, cameras fixed on her face, millions watching around the world. She'd rehearsed every move of the night. The smile, the posture, the applause at the right jokes. But she hadn't rehearsed this. She hadn't rehearsed being the target. So her instinct kicked in. Smile. A tight, practiced smile. The kind you wear when you're trying to pretend the blade hasn't cut. But the cameras caught it. The corners of her mouth stiff. Her eyes darting. The faintest flicker of fury behind the facade. And Harry, poor Harry, he knew. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped nervously against his leg. He leaned slightly toward Meghan, whispering something that didn't matter because the damage was already done. He couldn't shield her. He couldn't fight the laughter. The prince who once battled the press on her behalf was helpless in the face of comedy. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Because when the world laughs at you, there is no defense. The reaction inside the theater tells its own story. Some celebrities doubled over, clutching their stomachs. Others covered their mouths, torn between shock and amusement. A few clapped harder, reveling in the release of tension. But what united them all was the sense that a line had been crossed. And once crossed, it could never be uncrossed. Meghan was no longer just an attendee at the Emmys. She was the night's spectacle, the target everyone would remember. Ask yourself, why did it feel so satisfying to so many? Why did the phrase echo far beyond the walls of the theater? Because in a world where Meghan had positioned herself as both victim and heroine, entitled princess exposed the contradiction. She claimed independence, yet clung to titles. She spoke of humility, yet demanded special treatment. She preached privacy, yet pursued spotlight. That contradiction had irritated people for years. Nate crystallized it into a phrase that fit neatly into headlines, memes, and hashtags. It was devastatingly efficient. And here's where the cruelty of comedy reveals itself. A scandal can be explained. A headline can be denied. A rumor can be dismissed. But a joke? A joke lives forever. A joke gets replayed, shared, turned into GIFs and memes. A joke becomes the shorthand for your entire identity. Meghan wasn't just roasted. She was branded. Entitled princess was no longer just a punchline. It was a label she couldn't peel off. The power shift in the room was immediate. Before the line, Meghan had been poised, regal, untouchable. After the line, she was diminished, human, vulnerable. And the room fed on it. Hollywood, for all its politeness, thrives on seeing power punctured. They laughed not just at Meghan, but at the absurdity of her attempt to command respect in a room that had never fully accepted her. That laughter was a verdict. You don't belong here the way you think you do. Now, think about the ripple effect. Outside the auditorium, millions were watching live. The clip was captured, replayed, uploaded, and within minutes, social media erupted. Hashtags trended. Memes flooded timelines. Entitled Princess was plastered across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Late-night hosts clipped it. Bloggers dissected it. Ordinary viewers who had grown weary of Meghan piled on. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a movement. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because Meghan wasn't about to take it lying down. Backstage, her team scrambled, furious, panicked, desperate to spin the narrative. But how do you spin laughter? How do you erase a line that has already gone viral? That's the nightmare Meghan faced. And in that nightmare, her every move would only make things worse. Because here's the cruelest twist. Nate didn't just drop one line and walk away. He left the door wide open for more. He had set the tone. He had given the room permission. And Meghan had no idea that the worst was still to come. Because if Entitled Princess was the first strike, the second would cut even deeper. And Meghan's reaction would be caught on camera in a way that no PR team could hide. Sometimes silence says more than words. Sometimes a smile isn't joy, it's survival. And on that Emmy night, Meghan Markle's smile became her shield. But it was a shield cracking under pressure, and the cameras captured every fracture. The moment Nate Bargatze dropped Entitled Princess, Meghan knew she was being watched, not just by the people in the room, but by millions at home, and millions more who would see the clip replayed endlessly online. Every twitch of her lips, every flicker in her eyes, every shift in her posture told a story. And that story was louder than any rebuttal she could have made. The first thing to notice was the freeze. Meghan's face didn't collapse into shock. It didn't flare into anger. It froze. That's the instinct of someone who's trained themselves to perform under scrutiny. She has built her entire public life on managing reactions, on controlling the narrative. So, in that instant, she did what she always does. She smiled. But the smile was tight. The corners of her mouth pulled upward, but not too far. Her eyes narrowed, not in warmth, but in calculation. It wasn't joy, it was armor. Harry's body language gave it away too. As Nate delivered the line, Harry shifted slightly in his seat, leaning toward Meghan, his jaw stiff. He glanced at her, then back toward the stage, then back again. He whispered something under his breath, maybe a reassurance, maybe an attempt at humor, but Meghan didn't turn to him. She stayed locked forward, still smiling, still frozen. That's when you realize she wasn't smiling for Harry. She was smiling for the cameras. Body language experts love moments like these. And sure enough, within hours of the Emmys broadcast, analysts were dissecting Meghan's reactions frame by frame. They pointed out the subtle tightening of her lips, the way her shoulders rose slightly as though bracing for impact, the way her eyes darted briefly downward before locking back on the stage. These are tells, they explained, signs of discomfort, signs of someone trying to maintain control while feeling the ground slip beneath them. Ask yourself, how many times have you seen Meghan laugh at herself? Think back through her public appearances. Think through the interviews, the staged moments, the red carpets. How often has she allowed herself to be the butt of the joke? The answer is almost never. Meghan thrives on gravitas, on seriousness, on framing her life as a battle for dignity. That's why this joke hit so hard. Because instead of laughing with her, the world was laughing at her. And she had no script, no prepared lines, no strategy to handle it. Now imagine sitting in her place. The laughter rolls over you like a wave, but it's not yours. You're at the center of the joke, the punchline, the target. You know you can't show anger, because anger looks like weakness. You know you can't walk out, because that would confirm the insult. You know you can't lash back, because the cameras would eat it alive. So what do? You smile. You freeze. You hold on. But inside, you're crumbling. And the camera's caught every second. One clip, in particular, went viral within minutes. It zoomed in on Meghan's face as the laughter erupted. For a fraction of a second, before the smile returned, her lips pressed tightly together. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes hardened. It was the moment her mask slipped. Just a heartbeat of raw emotion. Anger, humiliation, maybe even fear, before the performance resumed. But that single second was all the internet needed. Screenshots flooded timelines. Entitled "Princess Caught Off Guard" trended worldwide. The cruelty of it all. Meghan wasn't wrong to try to hold her composure. Any seasoned celebrity would have done the same. But because of who she is, because of her history, her controversies, her contradictions, that frozen smile became symbolic. To her critics, it was proof. Proof that beneath the polished exterior lies entitlement. Proof that she couldn't take what she had so often dished out. Proof that she wasn't the graceful duchess she pretended to be. Harry's helplessness only made it worse. Viewers picked apart his reaction too. The nervous glance, the whispered words, the way he shifted in his seat. Some said he looked protective. Others said he looked defeated. But either way, the verdict was clear. He couldn't save her. Not here. Not from laughter. Not from the truth disguised as comedy. Do you see the irony? Meghan has spent years accusing the British press of cruelty, of using her as a target. But on that Emmy night, it wasn't the tabloids that cut her down. It wasn't a headline, or a rumor, or a palace insider. It was laughter. Laughter from her peers. Laughter from an industry she desperately wanted to embrace her. That's what made her smile so devastating. Because it wasn't the smile of someone unfazed. It was the smile of someone cornered. And here's the twist that no one saw coming. The audience wasn't just laughing at Nate's joke. They were watching Meghan's reaction, waiting to see how she would handle it. Would she laugh along, proving she could take a joke? Would she ignore it, letting the moment pass? Or would she break, letting the mask fall completely? What they got was the middle ground. A frozen smile, just convincing enough to keep her seated, but not convincing enough to silence the critics. That smile became the story. Articles the next morning didn't just quote Nate's line. They described Meghan's face. They described Harry's discomfort. They described the silence beneath the laughter. And that silence spoke volumes. Because if Meghan had truly been unfazed, she would have laughed, maybe even waved it off. Instead, she froze. And freezing, in Hollywood, is fatal. But remember, this was only the beginning. That frozen smile was the first crack. And once the mask slips, even a little, the whole facade begins to crumble. Because Meghan wasn't going to let the night end there. She wasn't going to let one line define her. She was already planning her next move. What she didn't realize was that the cameras had captured enough to haunt her forever. And if you thought that smile told a story, wait until you see what happened when the lights dimmed and the show moved backstage. Because behind those curtains, Meghan's mask shattered completely, and the fallout was more explosive than anyone imagined. Harry came to protect, but on this night, he was powerless. The irony is almost cruel when you think about it. This was the man who once defied the monarchy for Meghan, who fought the British tabloids tooth and nail, who positioned himself as her shield against the world. Yet under the bright lights of the 2025 Emmys, that shield crumbled. Because no matter how hard he tried, no matter how many glances, whispers, or reassuring touches he offered, he could not protect Meghan from laughter. And that was the one enemy neither of them ever prepared for. Look closely at Harry in that moment. The camera caught it. The jaw tight, the hand tapping anxiously against his thigh, the half turned toward Meghan as though his very presence might absorb her humiliation. He leaned in, lips moving just enough to whisper something only she could hear. Maybe it was a reassurance. Don't worry, it's just a joke. Maybe it was a plea, stay calm. But whatever he said, it wasn't enough. Meghan's frozen smile didn't thaw. Her eyes didn't soften. She was locked in her own storm, and Harry knew it. He was sitting right beside her, yet miles away from reaching her. Here's the paradox of Harry. For years, his public persona has been defined by two roles, the rebel prince and the protective husband. He gave up his place in the monarchy. He battled his own family. He moved across the world, all in the name of shielding Meghan from the cruelty she claimed was destroying her. But what happens when the cruelty doesn't come from an institution or a press office, but from the collective laughter of a room? What happens when the attack is disguised as humor? There's no lawsuit to file, no palace to confront, no villain to blame. There's just the sound of laughter echoing in your ears, a sound you can't silence. Harry's discomfort became its own spectacle. The audience saw it. The cameras caught it. And soon, the internet dissected it. Clips of Harry glancing nervously at Meghan circulated online with captions like, "He can't save her this time." Memes compared him to a bodyguard out of his depth, a knight without armor, a husband watching his wife drown in laughter he couldn't stop. The humiliation wasn't just Meghan's anymore. It was Harry's too. He was exposed as powerless, his greatest role, protector, rendered meaningless. Ask yourself, what must that have felt like for him? To sit in that room, surrounded by Hollywood elites, hearing them laugh at his wife, knowing he couldn't stand up, couldn't shout back, couldn't do anything but smile stiffly and pretend it didn't sting? Harry has always been emotional, reactive, quick to anger when it comes to Meghan's treatment. Yet in that auditorium, he had no outlet. He was trapped, just like her, but his trap was even crueler. Because Meghan's humiliation was visible. His was silent. And here's where the irony deepens. Harry left the royal family in part because he felt like he couldn't protect Meghan within it. He said the press was merciless, that the palace refused to help, that his wife was left defenseless. So he walked away, determined to be her shield. But at the Emmys, stripped of royal formality, surrounded by Hollywood rather than courtiers, he found himself in the exact same position, watching Meghan suffer and being unable to stop it. Only this time, there was no escape. Because how do you escape a joke that has already been told, a laugh that has already been released? Harry's helplessness only amplified Meghan's humiliation. In moments like these, audiences don't just watch the person being roasted, they watch the reactions of those around them. And Harry's reaction told a story all on its own. It said, "I don't know what to do. I can't fix this. I can't make it stop." That image of the once rebellious prince, the man who defied a 1,000-year-old monarchy, reduced to silence beside his wife, was devastating. To critics, it confirmed what they'd long suspected, that Harry wasn't Meghan's shield, but her shadow, dragged along, absorbing her humiliation as his own. And the cruelest part? Hollywood ate it up. The audience wasn't just laughing at Meghan. They were laughing at Harry's discomfort too. They saw the prince fidget. They saw the forced smile. They saw the man who once represented defiance now looking like a schoolboy caught in the wrong room. The laughter rolled over him, not as loud as it did Meghan, but just as cutting. Because laughter doesn't discriminate. When the room decides you're the punchline, everyone connected to you gets dragged in. Now picture the moment the cameras cut away. The laughter still buzzing, Nate moving on to his next bit, the room still chuckling. Harry leaned back in his seat, his eyes darting around, searching the crowd, searching for something, anything that could help. But there was nothing, just the realization settling in his chest. They had lost the room. And once you lose the room, you don't get it back. That helplessness didn't stop at the auditorium. It followed him backstage. It followed him into the whispers, into the frantic phone calls, into the way Meghan's team scrambled to contain the fallout. Harry stood there, beside her, but his presence meant nothing. For all his sacrifices, for all his battles, he couldn't fight this war. And maybe, just maybe, in that silence, Harry realized that his life had become a cycle of trying to protect Meghan from storms that always found her anyway. But Meghan wasn't content to sit in silence. The helplessness that paralyzed Harry only ignited her. Because if she couldn't laugh it off, if she couldn't stop the laughter, then she would fight it another way. And backstage, her team moved quickly, rallying around her, panicked voices whispering strategies. They thought they could contain it. They thought they could spin it. They thought they could erase it. What they didn't realize was that the cameras had already captured enough. The internet had already seized it. The world had already chosen the narrative. And no amount of spin could undo the moment when the entitled princess smiled through her humiliation while her prince sat helpless at her side. When the lights dimmed and the applause faded into the next segment, most people in the room thought the moment had passed. The joke had landed. The laughter had roared. The cameras had moved on. But behind the curtain, away from the carefully choreographed stage, the real drama exploded. Because Meghan Markle wasn't about to let the word entitled princess echo unchecked through the airwaves. The second she stepped backstage, her mask cracked. The frozen smile slipped. And the panic set in. Witnesses would later describe the atmosphere as electric, chaotic, and tense. Meghan's team, her small army of PR strategists, aides, and advisors, swarmed like bees disturbed from their hive. Phones came out instantly. Calls to journalists, texts to allies in the press, frantic whispers about damage control. It was instinct, rehearsed 100 times before. The spin machine roared to life. But this time, there was a problem. How do you spin a laugh? How do you erase a moment already clipped, shared, memed, and dissected before you've even left the building? That was the nightmare they walked into. Meghan's own reaction behind the curtain was sharp, clipped, unfiltered. Gone was the regal posture, the gracious smile. She was furious. Furious at Nate, furious at the Emmys, furious at the universe for putting her in that seat, in that spotlight, in that joke. She hissed to aides about betrayal. She demanded explanations. Why hadn't anyone warned her? Why hadn't anyone prepared for this? And then came the demand that shocked even her closest circle. She wanted the joke removed from rebroadcast. She wanted the Emmys to cut the clip before it aired again, to edit the insult out of existence. Think about that for a moment. Meghan, who built her brand on exposing truths, was demanding that someone erase a truth she couldn't handle. It was a contradiction so glaring that even her own team hesitated. But Meghan wasn't hearing hesitation. She was commanding, her voice sharp, her tone leaving no room for dissent. Get it taken down, she reportedly snapped. This cannot be allowed to spread. But here's the cruel reality of live television in 2025. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. By the time Meghan made her demand, the clip had already gone viral. Dozens of phones in the auditorium had captured it. Social media had clipped it, captioned it, mocked it, multiplied it. Within minutes, hashtags like #EntitledPrincess and #Nate vs. Meghan were trending worldwide. News sites ran with it before the show had even ended. Meghan's demand was impossible. And deep down, maybe she knew it. But in that moment, fury outweighed logic. Harry, still by her side, tried to calm her. His hand on her shoulder. His voice low, murmuring something about ignoring it, about rising above. But Meghan didn't want to rise above. She wanted revenge. And her team, caught between loyalty and reality, scrambled to find solutions. Could they frame it as bullying? Could they accuse Nate of being cruel, out of touch, insensitive? Could they rally sympathetic voices to drown out the laughter with outrage? These were the frantic conversations happening in real time. even as the show continued on stage. But here's where it got even worse for Meghan. Someone backstage overheard the panic. Someone saw the fury, the snapping, the desperate orders. And someone talked. Within hours, insider reports leaked to the press. Headlines screamed that Meghan had demanded censorship after being roasted at the Emmys. The very thing she wanted hidden became the very thing amplified. Her demand became proof of the very entitlement Nate had joked about. It was almost poetic, tragically, cruelly poetic. Ask yourself, why does this detail matter? Because it shows the difference between perception and reality. On stage, Meghan smiled. On stage, she played the role of composure. But backstage, the truth spilled out. The panic, the anger, the inability to laugh at herself. That's the Meghan the world wasn't supposed to see. And once it leaked, it confirmed what critics had always claimed. That her composure is performance, her grace a facade, her strength a script. The Emmy producers, meanwhile, were unmoved. They had no intention of cutting the broadcast. Nate's line wasn't a scandal to them. It was comedy. It was what hosts are hired to do. Roast, poke fun, keep the night alive. They shrugged off Meghan's fury. To them, she was just another celebrity upset about a joke. But to Meghan, it was personal. It was a wound to her image, her brand, her story. And the refusal to accommodate her demand deepened the humiliation. Harry's helplessness grew heavier backstage. He stood there, silent, as Meghan argued with her advisors, as she demanded the impossible. He didn't step in to confront anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked tired, worn down, a man watching the cycle repeat again. For him, it must have felt familiar. The panic, the press, the scramble, it was the royal machine all over again, only this time in Hollywood. And just like before, he couldn't stop it. Do you see the irony? Meghan's desperate attempt to control the moment only made it worse. Her fury, her demands, her refusal to let it go. These things didn't erase the entitled princess label. They cemented it. Because nothing screams entitlement louder than trying to erase a joke told at your expense. And the more she pushed, the more the story grew. What might have been a passing laugh became a global headline. And yet, Meghan didn't stop. She doubled down. She called her allies. She reached out to friendly journalists. She wanted sympathy pieces, narratives that painted her as the victim of cruelty, as the woman unfairly targeted on a night meant to celebrate art. Her team worked through the night drafting statements, planting seeds. But the truth was already out. The clip had already taken on a life of its own. And then came the twist that no one expected. One of Meghan's supposed Hollywood allies broke ranks. Instead of defending her, they quietly fed details of the backstage meltdown to the press. Betrayal from inside her own circle. And that betrayal would ignite the next stage of this saga. A media war Meghan thought she could win, but which quickly spiraled beyond her control. Because when the headlines hit the next morning, they didn't just quote Nate's joke. They exposed Meghan's fury. They painted a picture of a duchess unraveling backstage. And suddenly, the joke wasn't just funny. It was prophecy. Within hours of the Emmys wrapping, the battle lines were drawn. It wasn't just about what Nate Bargatze had said anymore. It was about what the world chose to believe. And in 2025, belief isn't built on facts. It's built on headlines, hashtags, and narratives that move faster than the truth. Meghan Markle's team wanted control. They wanted to paint her as the victim of a cruel comedian. But the reality, the footage, the laughter, the frozen smile, was uncontrollable. And the media war that followed proved that no matter how carefully you try to spin, perception always outruns intention. Let's start with the pro-Meghan coverage. Within hours, certain outlets known to favor her and Harry ran sympathetic headlines. Duchess humiliated by Emmy host cheap shot. Cruel joke at Meghan's expense overshadows awards. Articles framed her as a woman once again unfairly targeted, drawing parallels to the way the British press had treated her in the past. Writers compared Nate Bargatze to court jesters who mocked queens, suggesting his words weren't comedy but cruelty. Meghan's allies emphasized her composure, praising the way she handled the moment with grace by smiling and refusing to retaliate. They pushed the angle that Meghan was a victim of bullying, targeted for being a strong woman who dared to speak out. But then came the other headlines. The ones Meghan's team couldn't control, and they were louder. Nate nails it. Meghan the entitled princess. Hollywood finally laughs at Meghan. Room erupts as Duchess gets roasted. These pieces didn't just report the joke. They celebrated it. Columnists called it the line of the night, arguing that Nate had captured the unspoken truth about Meghan in 4 devastating syllables. Others pointed out the irony. Meghan had spent years painting herself as the underdog, only to be exposed as the very thing she denied. Social media commentary made it worse. Memes of Meghan's frozen smile spread like wildfire. Clips of Harry's nervous glance were captioned with jokes about the royal hostage. Hashtags like #EntitledPrincess and #MeghanRoast trended worldwide. Do you see the split? On one side, Meghan's defenders screamed bullying. On the other, the broader public laughed and agreed. And the worst part? The laughter drowned out the outrage. Because in a battle between pity and humor, humor wins every time. People don't share think pieces on dignity. They share memes. They don't replay calls for compassion. They replay punchlines. Meghan's team tried to fight back with interviews. Friendly journalists were briefed to emphasize her dignified reaction. One insider described her as unshaken, smiling bravely in the face of cruelty. But then leaked reports about her backstage panic surfaced. Meghan demanded joke be censored, blared one headline. Sources say Duchess furious after Nate's line. That leak gutted the victim narrative. How could Meghan claim composure if she'd raged behind the curtain, demanding the impossible? Suddenly, the graceful Duchess story looked hollow. The entitled princess joke looked prophetic. Ask yourself, why do people love seeing spin unravel? Because it feels like justice. For years, Meghan has been accused of manipulating narratives, of curating her image with surgical precision. But in this case, the spin didn't hold. The truth, or at least the perception, escaped before she could cage it. And that perception was merciless. The public didn't see a victim. They saw a woman exposed, a duchess cornered, an image collapsing. The media war didn't stop there. Pundits weighed in. Late-night hosts replayed the clip, adding their own jabs. She wanted to be a princess. Now she finally got the title, just not the one she wanted, one quipped. Comedians defended Nate, saying roasting celebrities is part of the job. Industry insiders whispered that Meghan had walked into the room expecting deference, but walked out a punchline. Even British tabloids, always eager to pounce, splashed the story across their front pages, calling it karma on live TV. And here's where it gets interesting. Meghan's silence only made it worse. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't address the joke directly. She let her team fight the battle for her. But in the absence of her voice, the louder narrative won. To many, her silence looked like confirmation. If the joke wasn't true, why not laugh it off? Why not brush it aside? Why not respond with wit? Instead, the Duchess who had once taken Oprah's stage to pour out her truth sat frozen, quiet, diminished. And silence, in the world of media, is an answer all on its own. Harry's role in this war was equally scrutinized. Clips of his nervous glance and stiff posture went viral alongside Meghan's smile. Articles questioned whether he regretted the night, whether he felt humiliated too. Some headlines even turned him into a victim. Prince left powerless as Meghan becomes the punchline. But the harshest ones painted him as complicit. Harry's Hollywood gamble explodes. Either way, the damage was shared. The Sussex brand, built on their united front, took the hit together. Here's the cruel paradox. Meghan had gone to the Emmys to remind Hollywood she belonged, to network, to be photographed, to show she was still relevant. Instead, she became the story for all the wrong reasons. And no amount of PR spin could change that. Because once the laughter became the narrative, her attempts to rewrite it only reinforced Nate's point. Entitlement isn't proven by wealth or status. It's proven by your reaction when someone mocks you. And Meghan's reaction fit the label perfectly. But this was just the beginning. Because in the middle of the media chaos, a single clip leaked, unedited, uncut, raw. A clip that showed Meghan's face in the seconds after Nate's line, before the smile returned. And that clip would ignite a new firestorm, one her team couldn't fight, because it was proof not of what Nate said, but of how Meghan truly felt. It started with a 12-second clip. Just 12 seconds. That was all it took to set the internet on fire. Someone in the audience, phone in hand, captured the exact moment Nate Bargatze delivered entitled Princess, and panned directly to Meghan Markle's face. No production crew filters, no careful Emmy broadcast cuts. Raw, unedited, brutally honest. It showed Meghan's frozen smile faltering, her lips pressing together in a tight line, her eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before the mask snapped back into place. That tiny crack in her performance was more powerful than any headline, any article, any spin her team tried to release. Because this wasn't someone telling you what Meghan felt, it was proof. The clip hit social media before Meghan's limo even left the venue. At first, it circulated quietly on TikTok, captioned with simple text, "She's not happy." Then came the remixes. Users looped her face in slow motion, zooming in on the twitch of her jaw, the flicker of anger in her eyes. Memes exploded. Meghan photoshopped onto Disney's Frozen, tagged #SmileGate, or compared to characters cracking under pressure in famous movies. The phrase "entitled princess" wasn't just a punchline anymore. It was a brand. It was stamped across GIFs, hashtags, parodies. And once the internet brands you, you don't get to choose whether it sticks. What made it worse for Meghan was the speed. By the next morning, the clip had racked up tens of millions of views across platforms. Late-night hosts replayed it with glee, some freeze-framing the exact second her mask slipped. "That's the moment she knew," one joked, drawing laughter from studio audiences. Commentators weighed in. Body language experts dissected every micro-expression, the clenched jaw, the darting eyes, the forced recovery. They didn't just analyze her, they exposed her. Each frame was used to argue that Meghan couldn't handle being laughed at, that she was as entitled as Nate's line suggested. Harry didn't escape either. In the same clip, the camera caught him whispering to her, his brow furrowed, his body leaning in. Internet users speculated endlessly. What was he saying? Memes popped up with imagined captions. "Smile, Meghan, they're watching." Or "Just laugh, or we're doomed." Some even added voiceovers, dubbing in satirical lines that mocked Harry's helplessness. The prince, once hailed as brave for protecting his wife, was now a side character in her humiliation, a husband powerless against a punchline. And then came the celebrities. Some liked the clip on Twitter. Some posted laughing emojis. A few even shared it outright, adding their own commentary. "We've all been there," one actress wrote, "when the joke's on us and the cameras won't quit." But others weren't so subtle. "That's not composure," one director tweeted. "That's entitlement cracking." Every like, every repost, every subtle jab magnified the humiliation. It wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It was Hollywood's verdict. Meghan's team scrambled again, but by now, their attempts felt desperate. They tried pushing sympathetic hashtags. #RespectWomen, #CruelComedy, #StandWithMeghan. But those hashtags were drowned by #EntitledPrincess, #SmileGate, and #NateDestroyedHer. The internet had chosen sides, and once the internet decides, no PR campaign can reverse it. Every attempt to spin it only fed the fire, reinforcing the idea that Meghan couldn't take a joke, that she demanded control even over laughter. Ask yourself this. Why do viral clips carry more weight than polished interviews? Because they feel real. They cut past the veneer. Meghan had spent years controlling her image through carefully staged settings. Oprah interviews, Netflix documentaries, glossy magazine spreads. But those 12 seconds weren't staged. They were raw. And raw is dangerous. Raw is believable. Raw is unforgettable. What hurt Meghan most wasn't just the humiliation. It was who joined the laughter. People she considered allies, people she'd counted on for Hollywood validation, stayed silent. Some even quietly liked posts mocking her. That silence was deafening. It told Meghan something she hadn't wanted to admit. Hollywood wasn't protecting her anymore. The sympathy well had run dry. And when sympathy dries up, mockery flows. Even in the UK, the clip made front pages. Tabloids crowed that Nate had done in one night what years of royal feuds had failed to do. Expose Meghan to ridicule in her adopted kingdom. They splashed stills of her frozen face under headlines like "Smile, Duchess, You're on Camera," and "Princess of Pity No More." For the British press, it was vindication. For Meghan, it was salt in a wound that was already gaping. And yet, the cruelest twist came not from strangers, but from someone close to her circle. A Hollywood acquaintance, once seen as a quiet supporter, shared the clip on Instagram with a cryptic caption. Sometimes the mask slips. No names. No hashtags. Just those 5 words. But everyone knew what it meant. That betrayal cut deeper than any meme, because it signaled the collapse of her inner fortress. If allies were willing to pile on, even subtly, then Meghan wasn't just losing the internet. She was losing Hollywood itself. Harry tried to shield her from the online storm, urging her to ignore the noise. But how do you ignore a clip replayed on every platform, every late-night show, every headline? How do you ignore a joke that becomes the symbol of your entire public persona? Meghan couldn't escape it. Everywhere she turned, on her phone, in the news, in whispered conversations, the words followed, entitled princess. And yet, Meghan wasn't finished. Humiliated, exposed, abandoned, she was still determined to fight back. And her next move would shock even her critics. Because if Hollywood was laughing at her, she would try to turn the tables. She would launch a counterattack, not just against Nate Bargatze, but against the entire culture that dared to mock her. But what Meghan didn't realize was that Hollywood was already moving on, and her counterattack would only dig the hole deeper. When the applause faded and the headlines rolled in, Meghan still believed she could salvage the night. After all, Hollywood had always been about reinvention, about finding the right angle, the right ally, the right narrative. She thought, this is just a storm, it'll pass. But storms don't always pass. Some linger, some flood, some tear away everything you thought was secure. And for Meghan, the fallout from the Emmys wasn't a storm that faded. It was the beginning of a cold silence that told her the one thing she feared most. Hollywood was turning its back on her. At first, Meghan expected sympathy. She thought the phone would buzz with messages of support, invitations to dinners, reassurances from producers and actors who had once courted her friendship. But the calls didn't come. The texts didn't arrive. Instead, the silence grew louder by the day. Allies who once gushed about her went quiet. Producers who had smiled at her on red carpets looked the other way. Hollywood, the place she had staked her post-royal identity on, was moving on without her. Why? Because Hollywood isn't about loyalty. It's about momentum. And Meghan's momentum had been shattered by Nate Bargatze's joke. The industry smelled weakness, and in Hollywood, weakness is contagious. No one wanted to be associated with a punchline. No one wanted to risk their own credibility by defending someone who had become a meme. So they distanced themselves,